What would you do if, overnight, you lost everything that defines you, his career, his dreams, his identity, and even the ability to walk? It seems impossible to imagine, doesn't it? But for thousands of American veteran soldiers, this isn't a hypothetical question. It's the most brutal reality anyone can face. And the story you're about to hear is about one of those men, a man who lost his legs, his fiancée, his military career, but who found something much greater than all of that. Something that changed not only his life, but the lives of hundreds of others. Stay with me until the end, because what he built from pain will make you rethink everything you know about starting over. When Sergeant Michael Thompson woke up in that military hospital in San Diego in 2004, the first thing he tried to do was wiggle his toes. Nothing happened. He tried again and again. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the constant beeping of the heart monitors. The doctors came in with that look he'll never forget, a mixture of compassion and helplessness. And then came the news that completely shattered his world. He would never walk again. The explosion in Iraq had taken more than the movement of his legs. It had taken his dreams of becoming a colonel, his plans to build a family, his identity as a soldier, everything he had meticulously planned since he was 18 years old. Have you ever stopped to think about what truly motivates you, what gets you out of bed every day? For Michael, it was always to serve, to protect, to make a difference. And now, confined to a hospital bed, staring at the cold white ceiling, he couldn't find any reason to go on. The first few days were a blur of morphine and despair. The following weeks, an ever-deepening abyss. Visits from platoon mates who didn't know what to say. Calls from his mother that always ended in tears on the other end of the line. And that inner silence, that voice that kept repeating, "It's over, it's all over." But you know what's most impressive about this story? It's not the fact that Michael lost everything. It's what he did with that loss. Because in the next 5 years, this man who was destroyed, broken, completely adrift, built something so powerful, so inspiring, that it left the whole world speechless. Something that transformed the lives of hundreds of veterans who were going through the same hell as him. Something that proved that it's not our legs that make us move forward. It's our will not to give up, even when everything seems lost. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because this isn't just a story of overcoming adversity. It's a story about how the deepest pain can transform into the most powerful purpose you can imagine. It's about a soldier who lost his legs, but found a mission even greater than anything he had ever done on the battlefield. And that mission began at a very specific moment, in a very specific place, with a decision that would change not only his life, but the destiny of people he didn't even know yet. So take a deep breath and come with me, because you're about to experience the most incredible transformation journey I've ever witnessed. But before I tell you what Michael did after those dark days in the hospital, I need to ask you something. If this story is touching you in any way, if you've ever gone through a time when everything seemed lost, or if you know someone who is fighting their own battles right now, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It can be a word, a phrase, whatever you're feeling, because you know what happens when you share it. You create a current of energy, of hope, that reaches other people who need to hear exactly what you have to say. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of transformative content. And look, if you're still here with me, it's because real stories of overcoming adversity resonate with you. So help me spread this message. Leave a like on the video now. This simple gesture tells the algorithm that this content needs to reach more people, more hearts that need inspiration. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and activate the bell, because every week I bring you true stories of people who refuse to give up, who transform their pain into purpose. Stories that will make you believe that starting over is always possible, no matter how big the fall. Now, with you by my side on this journey, let's go back to Michael, because what happened to him in the following months was a true emotional roller coaster, and you need to understand each step of this transformation to comprehend how he got to where he is now. To understand Michael's transformation, you need to go back in time with me. You need to know who he was before all this happened. Because the truth is, the fall always hurts more when you come from a high place, when you had everything planned, when your life made sense, and you knew exactly who you were. Michael Thompson wasn't just another soldier, he was the soldier. That guy everyone admired, who inspired confidence just by walking into the room. He grew up in a small town in Texas, one of those small towns where everyone knows each other, where people still leave their doors unlocked, and where the values of honor and hard work are passed down from generation to generation. That was exactly Michael's world. The son of a mechanic, he learned early on what it meant to work with his hands, to fix what was broken, to solve problems. His father had a modest workshop, but he was respected by everyone. And Michael grew up seeing that. An honest man who woke up early, who kept his word, who helped his neighbors when their cars broke down in the middle of the night. But Michael had bigger dreams. Not bigger in the sense of wanting to be better than his father, but different. He wanted to serve. Since childhood, when he saw the Veterans Day parades passing through the city's main street, those men and women in uniform stirred something deep within him. He saw purpose in those faces. He saw meaning. And at 20, right after finishing high school, Michael made the decision that would change his life forever. He enlisted in the army. And it wasn't just because of the benefits or the stability. Michael joined full of ideals. Those pure ideals you have when you still believe you can make a difference in the world. He wanted to protect people. He wanted to be on the front lines. He wanted to be part of something bigger than himself. And you know what's impressive? He was exactly the kind of soldier you'd want by your side in a life or death situation. Loyal to the core, courageous without being reckless, always the first to volunteer for the most difficult missions, but never out of ego. It was because he truly believed it was his duty. Michael's superiors saw him as a natural leader. He rose through the ranks with impressive speed, not because he was flattering anyone, but because people naturally followed him. He had that presence, that energy that made other soldiers want to be better, and Michael had clear plans for the future. He wanted to retire as a colonel after a brilliant career serving his country. And then, when he returned home, he would open a school for at-risk youth, a place where boys and girls who lacked direction in life could find purpose, discipline, and hope. He had even talked to his fiancée about it. Yes, Michael was engaged. Her name was Jennifer, and they had met before he joined the army. She had waited for him during training, during his first missions, during the difficult separations. They planned to get married as soon as he returned from his next tour in Iraq. They had chosen the date, the place, even the flowers. Michael's mother was already organizing everything. It was supposed to be the wedding of the year in that small Texas town. So Michael embarked on what would be his third tour of duty in Iraq. He was confident, prepared, focused. It was March of 2004, and the war had already lasted more than a year. Michael and his platoon were based in Baghdad, and their routine was tense but controlled. Daily patrols, security checks, convoy protection. Was it dangerous? Of course, but Michael had training, he had experience, he had a solid team. He thought he knew how to handle any situation. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that starts like any other, with no sign that everything is about to change forever. Michael woke up early, as usual. He had coffee with the platoon, reviewed the equipment, checked the routes. The mission of the day was simple: routine patrol in a neighborhood that had been relatively quiet in recent weeks. They left at 8 in the morning, with the sun already beating down on the asphalt of Baghdad. The first few hours were peaceful. A few conversations with locals, document checks, nothing out of the ordinary. Michael was relaxed, joking with one of the younger soldiers, talking about the baseball game they had lost the previous week. And then, in a fraction of a second, everything changed. Michael didn't even have time to process what was happening. There was a deafening sound, a violent pressure in the air, and then nothing. Total darkness. The explosion was caused by an improvised device hidden in an abandoned car on the side of the road. The kind of trap the insurgents used to catch unsuspecting patrols. The blast was so powerful that it threw Michael several meters away. He didn't feel pain immediately. The shock was so great that his body went into a state of total numbness. All he remembers is the smoke, the screams of his comrades, the smell of burning and twisted metal. And then, darkness again. When Michael woke up, he was no longer in Baghdad. He was in a military hospital in San Diego, California. He had been evacuated urgently, undergone hours of surgery, and was now lying in that bed, trying to understand what had happened. The first thing he tried to do was wiggle his toes. Nothing. He tried to bend his knees. Nothing. A silent panic began to rise in his chest. He called a nurse, who immediately called a doctor. And that's when the news came that completely shattered Michael Thompson's world. The explosion had caused severe spinal cord damage. Doctors had done everything they could, but the damage was irreversible. Michael would never walk again. He would never feel his legs again. He would never be the soldier he once was. In a fraction of a second, a random explosion on a street in Baghdad had robbed him of everything. His military career was over. His plans to become a colonel were gone. The school for at-risk youth, his marriage to Jennifer, the life he had so carefully built, it all turned to dust. The first few days in the hospital were a blur of morphine, pain, and confusion. Michael could barely process reality. He stared at his motionless legs under the sheet and couldn't believe it was real, that this was happening to him. The doctors were kind but blunt. The nurses did their best to comfort him. But what on earth can anyone say in a situation like that? Everything will be all right. How can something like this be all right? And then the visits began. First came the superiors in their impeccable uniforms, with their formal words of gratitude for the service rendered. Then came some platoon mates, those who had survived the explosion without serious injuries. They entered the room unsure what to say, with that look of guilt in their eyes, as if they didn't deserve to be whole, while Michael lay there, broken. The conversations were uncomfortable, filled with long silences, and Michael began to refuse visits. It was easier to be alone than to see that pity in people's eyes. Jennifer came to see him 2 weeks after the surgery. Michael still remembers the way she entered the room, with that forced smile, trying to appear strong. She held his hand, said she was there for him, that they would face this together. But Michael saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the fear, the uncertainty, the unspoken question. What will our life be like now? They tried to maintain the relationship for a few months, but the truth is that everything had changed. Michael was no longer the man she had fallen in love with, and Jennifer, however hard she tried, couldn't look at him without seeing the tragedy, without feeling that crushing weight of what could have been. 5 months after the accident, Jennifer called off the wedding. She said it wasn't about love, that she still cared about him, but she couldn't anymore. Michael accepted it without a fight. In fact, he kind of expected it. How can you ask someone to stay when you yourself no longer want to be alive? After he was discharged from the hospital in San Diego, Michael was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Atlanta, one of those huge places full of veterans with stories similar to his. Men and women who had given everything for their country and were now there, trying to learn to live with bodies that no longer functioned the same way. The physical therapy sessions were torturous, not because of the physical pain, but because of the futility of it all. He was going to learn to use a wheelchair, to have more autonomy in daily activities, but so what? What did that change about the fact that his life was over? The first 6 months in that center were the worst of Michael's life. He woke up every day with no reason to get out of bed. He went to therapy sessions because he was forced to, but he didn't put in any effort. He refused to talk to the other veterans. He didn't answer calls from his mother, who called every day, crying on the other end of the line, begging him not to give up. He spent hours looking out the window of his room, watching people walking down the street outside, going about their normal lives, and he thought, why continue? Depression is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive all at once, like the explosion that took Michael's legs. It settles in slowly, like a fog that grows denser each day until you can't see anything beyond it. Michael stopped caring about anything. He stopped shaving, showering properly, eating. The therapist said it was normal, that it was part of the grieving process. But for Michael, it wasn't a process. It was the end. His friends stopped calling. Not because they didn't care, but because Michael never answered, never responded. And with time, people move on. Life goes on. And Michael remained there, trapped in a body he didn't recognize, in a life he didn't want, unable to see any way out, any light, any reason to keep trying. He was completely alone. And the worst kind of loneliness isn't being physically alone. It's being surrounded by people and still feeling like nobody understands you, that nobody can reach where you are. Michael had plunged so deep into the abyss that he thought he would never be able to get out again. And maybe he never would have left. Maybe Michael Thompson's story would have ended there, in that Atlanta rehabilitation center, with a broken soldier waiting for the days to pass until it no longer mattered. But then something happened that changed everything. Something simple, yet powerful. An encounter that planted a tiny seed of hope in soil that seemed completely barren. It was an afternoon in October, almost 7 months after the explosion. Michael was in the courtyard of the rehabilitation center, alone as always, staring into nothingness. And then an older man approached him in a wheelchair. He was a Vietnam War veteran, a 67-year-old man named James. He also didn't have legs, but he had something Michael had lost. He had a sparkle in his eyes, an energy that didn't make sense for someone in his condition. James didn't ask permission. He simply approached and began to speak. He recounted how he had lost his legs in 1969 in an ambush in the Vietnamese jungle. He said he had spent years believing his life was over, that he had even attempted suicide several times. Michael listened in silence, unsure where this was going. And then James said something that echoed in Michael's mind for days. You didn't lose your legs, son. You gained a new purpose. You just haven't discovered what it is yet. Michael looked at the man as if he were crazy. A new purpose. What purpose could there be for someone who can't even walk? But James didn't seem to care about Michael's skepticism. He continued talking. He recounted that after years of depression, he had decided to become a counselor for other veterans, that he had dedicated the last 30 years of his life to helping men and women returning from war broken, trying to find a way to move on. And that he had seen incredible transformations, people who were as broken as Michael and who today were living lives full of meaning. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about James's words. You've gained a new purpose. It sounded absurd, almost offensive. How can you gain anything when you've lost everything? But at the same time, something in those words had touched a part of Michael that he thought was dead. A tiny part, buried beneath all the pain and despair, but still there. In the following days, James continued to show up. He didn't pressure Michael, didn't try to force any deep conversation. Sometimes they would just sit in silence, side by side. Other times, James would tell stories of other veterans, of impossible transformations, of people who had found reasons to live that were even stronger than those they had before they were hurt. And slowly, very slowly, something began to change inside Michael. It wasn't a drastic change. It wasn't like he suddenly woke up happy and motivated. It was more like a tiny crack in a giant wall. The light still wasn't shining through, but at least now there was a crack, a possibility, a question he hadn't dared to ask before. What if James is right? What if there really is a way to rebuild my life? Michael began paying closer attention to the people around him at the rehabilitation center. There were veterans there who were in worse situations than him. Some had lost their arms, others had brain damage, others were blind, and yet some of them were smiling. Some of them were making plans for the future. How was that possible? And then, one November night, Michael made the most important decision of his life. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized he had two very clear options before him. He could continue down that path of self-destruction, letting depression suck away what little was left of him until there was nothing left. Or he could try. He could give a chance to this crazy idea that maybe, just maybe, there was still a purpose for him in this world. It wasn't an exciting decision. There was no background music, no moment of divine inspiration. It was a simple, almost mechanical choice. Okay, I'll try. And the next morning, for the first time in months, Michael got out of bed with a purpose. He went to find James and said, "Tell me what I need to do." James smiled, and in the months that followed, he became the mentor Michael didn't know he needed. They started small. James suggested that Michael begin attending support groups at the rehabilitation center. At first, Michael just sat listening without saying anything, but over time he began to share. He started talking about the explosion, about Jennifer, about the feeling of having lost his identity. And you know what happened? Other veterans started opening up too. They saw that Michael, this guy who had been a respected sergeant, was going through the same things they were, and somehow that helped. James then suggested the next step. Michael should start giving talks at veterans' hospitals. He should go to other soldiers who were going through the same thing he had gone through, who were in that abyss of depression and hopelessness, and tell his story. Tell them that he had been there, in that dark place, and that he had found a way out. Michael found the idea terrifying. He wasn't a speaker. He didn't know how to speak in public, and he was still battling his own demons. But James said something that stuck in his mind. You don't need to be healed to help others. You just need to be one step ahead, and you already are. So Michael agreed. His first talk was at a military hospital in Austin, Texas. He was nervous, sweating profusely, unsure of what he was going to say. But when he started speaking, when he looked into the eyes of those wounded soldiers and saw that they were really listening, really connecting with what he was saying, something changed. Michael realized that even broken, even in a wheelchair, even with all his original plans destroyed, he could still make a difference. He could still serve. Only now, instead of serving on the front lines of a war in the Middle East, he was serving in the invisible trenches of mental health and rebuilding shattered lives. But Michael didn't just want to talk. He wanted to do something more tangible, something that would truly transform people's lives in a concrete way. And that's when James suggested he learn a trade. Use your hands, James said. Build something. Michael had always been good with his hands. He had grown up in his father's workshop, fixing cars, assembling things. So he decided to learn adapted carpentry. It was difficult at first, relearning how to use the tools of a wheelchair, how to position himself, how to have strength and balance. But Michael was persistent, and slowly he began to create things. First they were small projects, boxes, shelves, simple objects. But over time, he got the hang of it, refining his skills, learning more complex techniques. And then, on a spring night in 2006, almost 2 years after the explosion, Michael had the idea that would change everything. He was talking to another veteran at the rehabilitation center, a guy named Marcus, who was also in a wheelchair. Marcus had returned home after being released from the center, but he was having enormous difficulties. His house wasn't wheelchair accessible. The bathroom was tiny, there were no ramps, the doors were too narrow. He was trapped in his own home, dependent on his wife for everything. And Michael thought, how many veterans are in this same situation? How many return to homes that weren't built for their new realities? And that's when the idea was born. A bold, almost impossible idea, but one that made perfect sense to Michael. He was going to found a non-profit organization that would build adapted homes, free of charge, for veterans with disabilities. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was frightening. Michael had no money. He had no management experience. He knew nothing about large-scale construction, but he had something more important. He had purpose. And when you have true purpose, you find a way. Michael started small, very small. He used the little money he had saved, and with the help of some volunteers he met at the rehabilitation center, began working on the first house. It was for an Afghanistan war veteran who had lost a leg and was living in a trailer that barely had room for him to move around. Michael spent months planning that project, designing every detail, thinking about every specific need a wheelchair-bound veteran would have. The construction was chaotic. They lacked experience, made mistakes, and had to redo things several times. But Michael was there every day from sunrise to sunset, supervising everything from his wheelchair, getting his hands dirty whenever possible, learning from every mistake. And after 8 months of intense work, the first house was finished. Michael will never forget the day they handed over that house. The veteran entered through the adapted door with its perfect ramp, walked through the spacious living room, saw the bathroom completely modified for his needs, and began to cry. He hugged Michael and said, "You gave me back my dignity." At that moment, Michael knew he had found his mission. What James had said almost 2 years before finally made complete sense. He hadn't lost his legs. He had gained a new purpose. A purpose that was bigger, more meaningful, more transformative than anything he could have done as an army colonel. Michael officially registered the organization under the name Warriors Rebuilt. The name said it all. It wasn't just about rebuilding houses. It was about rebuilding lives, identities, hopes. And news of that first house spread quickly. Other veterans began to get in touch. Volunteers appeared wanting to help. Construction companies began donating materials. And slowly, the project began to gain momentum. Over the next 3 years, Warriors Rebuilt constructed 50 homes in 12 American states. 50 veterans who had struggled to survive in inadequate housing now had dignified homes, spaces that respected their needs, places where they could live with autonomy and pride. And Michael was at the center of it all. He personally designed each project, visited each construction site, and trained other veterans to work on the construction, giving them not only homes, but also a purpose, a reason to wake up every day. But what truly touched Michael's heart wasn't the numbers. It was the stories, like that of Sarah, a widow of a soldier who had died in Afghanistan. She was raising 2 children alone in a tiny, dilapidated house. Warriors Rebuilt constructed a new home for her, tailored to her needs, with bedrooms for the children, a safe and welcoming space. Sarah hugged Michael on the day of delivery and said something he carries in his heart to this day. "You didn't just give me a house, you gave me back hope." Comment below. Purpose transforms everything. And today, Warriors Rebuilt has already helped more than 300 families. 300 veterans who were in the same situation as Michael, feeling that life was over, now have dignified, adapted homes built by people who understand exactly their pain. Because only those who have been through the fire know what it's like to walk through the ashes. and Michael transformed his ashes into a foundation to build something that no one imagined was possible. Michael's story teaches us something profound, something that goes far beyond personal overcoming. It shows us that it's not our circumstances that define who we are. It's what we choose to do with them. Michael had every reason in the world to give up. The explosion stole his legs, his career, his plans, his fiancée, everything. He spent months in the darkest abyss a person can know, but at some point he made a choice, a simple yet powerful choice, to try, just to try. And from that attempt, an organization was born that transformed hundreds of lives. From that attempt, a legacy was born that will continue to impact generations of veterans. Michael took the most painful thing that happened to him and transformed it into the fuel that lit a light in the lives of people he didn't even know. And if he managed to do that, confined to a wheelchair, dealing with depression, rebuilding everything from scratch, what really prevents us from starting over? What prevents us from transforming our pain into purpose? Today, Michael Thompson still wakes up early every day. He still supervises construction from his wheelchair. He still designs projects, still trains other veterans, still believes that nothing is impossible when you have a real reason to get out of bed. And when someone asks if he regrets going to war, if he regrets that day in Baghdad that changed everything, he gives an answer that sums up his entire journey. I lost my legs, but I found my mission, and it was worth every second. Look, if you've made it this far, if this story touched something inside you, I want to ask you something. Leave a comment below saying, I'm with you until the end. -D, because that shows me that this type of content makes sense, that it's worth continuing to bring real stories of people who refuse to give up. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button now. Every week, I bring stories that will make you rethink what it means to start over, what it means to transform pain into purpose. And of course, if this message resonated with you, leave a like on the video. This helps more people find this content, helps these stories reach those who really need to hear them. There's a video here that complements this topic about other impossible transformations that happened after the war. Click and continue with me there, because the journey doesn't end here. Thank you for being here. See you in the next video.